Hello. Welcome to Playful Resilience.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi, everyone. So I just put a little question there in the chat. Before we get started, what does playful resilience mean to you? So obviously these two words are very powerful. And so just as we're having our amazing conversation today, I think just thinking about how that applies to you in your life is something to have at the back of your mind. So it's time to get started. Thank you so much to Games for Change for having us here today. My name is Paisley Smith, and my pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm a virtual reality creator, filmmaker, and I work on the Unity for Humanity program at Unity Technologies. I also am really excited because I run our community, and that means to me connecting the dots between all of our fabulous creators. And if this is something you would like to join, I will share the link to our Discord at the end of this conversation today. So get excited for that. I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in Vancouver, Canada. And I invite you to reflect on the ancestral land that you are on. So, playful resilience. This is a conversation with our members of our Unity for Humanity community, and we will share how we are currently creating playful resilience in our communities through our use of immersive technology in the digital health and well-being space. So for me, playful resilience is the idea of learning to sustain and nourish myself and my community. Playfulness is an approach to digital health and well-being that counters how we often think of health, the health space. In my mind, I mean, I'm a filmmaker, so I don't come from this world at all. But when I think of like health, I often think of sterile, serious spaces, and playful resilience to me really challenges that idea. So what can you expect to hear from our amazing panelists today? You can hear an enlightening conversation that inspires, and hopefully you will leave with specific tools that you can use to create in this space. So while you're listening today, please jot down any questions you have because we will have time for a Q&A at the end. All right, so I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, starting with Dr. Gabe Pappalardo. So, I'm going to call you Dr. Gabe. Hopefully that's cool with you.
Fine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Dr. Gabe is an international public speaker, coach, and meditation instructor who champions the practice of mindfulness meditation to help people thrive in our busy world. So initially a skeptic, Dr. Gabe was converted by rigorous scientific research showing mindfulness's benefits to focus, health, and well-being. He then deepened his own practice by living do we say yogic?
Yes, so. Yeah. Yogic lifestyle.
He trained at the Neuro Meditation Institute. So beyond all of this, Gabe is also the founder and game director at Six Wing Studios. And in spring 2021, they released Amaru, the self-care virtual pet. So they have been working to combine the best of meditation apps and video games to create an ecosystem of content that supports mental health.
Awesome. Thanks, Paisley.
You're welcome. So next we have Austin Stanbury. Austin is an XR developer. Austin, let's see a little wave from you. All right, there you are. Is an XR developer creating immersive applications that improve public institutions, including education, health, and government. Austin is a recent graduate of the University of Florida's Digital Worlds Institute MIDAS program. So do you want to tell us what MIDAS stands for?
Absolutely. That's the Masters in Digital Arts and Sciences. So it's basically learning development for spatial computing applications.
Amazing. So Austin has received numerous awards at major hackathons internationally, and he aspires to leverage extended reality to solve practical problems and enhance our understanding of the world. So he and Ines, who I'm about to introduce, collaborated on COVID reflections. Next up, we have Ines Said. Ines is a software engineer in AR/VR, working at the University of Florida's Digital Worlds Institute. As a researcher, Ines's work has been featured in numerous top venues. With her competitive software engineering, she has won numerous hackathons across the US and Canada. Ines was awarded a COVID-19 research grant funded by Google to carry out research on public health applications. Her goal is to combine the fields of art and technology while tackling complex social issues and make technology enjoyable and accessible for all. So welcome, Austin, and Ines.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Deirdre V. Lyons. Deirdre is a producer and a performer in VR, film, and immersive theater. She's been an actor in Tender Claus's award-winning performance of The Under Presents and Tempest. And just for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a live, part scripted, part improvised, immersive theatrical experience that audience attend from home using a VR headset that is experienced as a one-person show for small, intimate audiences. Inspired by this work, Deirdre and her team went on to create a VR version of the Severance Theory Welcome to Respite, which now this is a lot of wins. So they premiered at Tribeca, were officially selected for the Venice International Film Festival. They were winner of the Best Narrative Experience at Rain Dance, and they have won a ton of other accolades. Recently, her production of Gumball Dreams had its world premiere at South by Southwest and won the Audience Award for Best XR Experience. So let's give everyone here a really warm welcome. We can't hear you, but we know that you're excited. All right, so I'm going to get started, and the way this is going to work is I'm going to direct a question to each of you, and then we'll have like a shared conversation together. So Ines and Austin, I'm going to start with you. So recently you created a project all around COVID-19, which reflected basically it was a public exhibition where people would walk by and see a screen where they would see their own body reflected at them with what happens when COVID is in your system. And through the surprise of what they discovered in what they saw in this reflection, it caused them to want to get vaccinated. And so you actually had a sign up for vaccinations right there near the experience. That sounds right?
Yeah, we had a mobile vaccine unit next to the public art display where people can get general health checkups or get their first, second, or third booster shot.
Amazing. So I guess my question for you would be, how do you feel that the element of playfulness, how do you feel that this element of playfulness and discovery in your work increase the impact on your community and audience?
I think that was the main important part of our project, to make it fun and playful. Because the problem with, at least at the University of Florida, it was very hard to get all the students to get the vaccine. So we wanted to engage them in a fun way. And it worked, because when people pass through the display, they look back and they're like, oh, what happened there? What is that avatar copying my movement? And then they start jumping and like dancing and doing all sorts of things in front of the avatar and see it reflect their movement. And then at some point they look at the lungs and they say, oh, what's that? And we explain to them that that's what happens to the lungs when a person gets COVID and it gets to a worse like situation. And some people really got affected by that, and they got scared thinking it's really their lungs. And we had to explain to them that it's just a display of what the COVID would look like. And so the fun part is what catches their attention. And then the next part is to tell them, okay, this is what happens. And that encouraged them to pass by the health clinic. Then maybe Austin.
Yeah, Austin, if you have anything you want to add, otherwise I can tailor a fresh question for you.
Oh, not at all. No, I think that's quite right. That so we really developed this just trying to come up with a more kind of intuitive way to convey information, right, through utilizing AR in a public setting as an informational tool or an educational tool. We really didn't expect how much people would enjoy interacting with the installation. And in fact, that's really what that was sort of the make or break for it. In fact, right? I mean, like as Ines was saying, there were times where our installation quite literally would be surrounded by a crowd of people watching what's going on screen, just because it was so interactive, engaging, right? But while they're there the whole time, it's providing information about COVID, etc., right? So I think it really ties in perfectly with that theme of playful resilience, as you're stating.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And when you were sharing this work, how were you measuring impact? Was it the amount of people who were engaged and participating in the experience of watching or dancing or seeing themselves in this reflection, or was it actually, were you measuring the number of COVID vaccinations that you were registering?
Absolutely. So terribly sorry, Ines. So there's there was definitely a qualitative and a quantitative aspect, right? So just by the numbers, about a third of people who interacted with the display went to the mobile vaccination unit. Obviously, we don't have data on what they did, but they did visit the unit either for a checkup or for a vaccination or for a booster. But we also measured the impressions, and there were hundreds of people, in fact, who stopped by our display. And, I think really just beyond the numbers, moving into the kind of qualitative aspect of it, what was most impressive for us was how people chose to interact with the display. We thought maybe people would, and really, frankly, early in our design process, we were anticipating that people would just sort of stand in front of the display and see, like, and absorb the information, right? But actually,
about it.
Yeah, actually, everybody, it was like people sprung into action. As soon people would be literally jumping around in front of the display, trying to get it to lose tracking or whatever, or dancing. There were people twerking in front of the display, as funny as that is, So it really brought out these kind of really candid interactions with people, just in the general audience, that you could never, at least in my impression, you'd never be able to reach people like that through giving them a handout or just kind of telling them, hey, this is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to move on to Deirdre. Deirdre, in your work with immersive theater, you have connected with audiences on mental health storytelling. And I was just wondering how your work with severance theory and gumball dreams exemplifies this idea of playful resilience.
I love playful resilience. When you mentioned it earlier, the first thing that comes to my mind is the song from Mary Poppins, "A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down."
A classic song.
It truly is. Like, resilience brings up these thoughts of, like, there is something that I have in my life that is challenging me, something that I have to either continue to deal with or overcome. And the idea of, making the idea of making these playful can help us get through some of the tough times that we experience. It's, why gamification of almost everything is like kind of the way that we're going, because making things fun, making it interactive engages people in a different way than we're used to, that that doesn't feel like a lecture or something that is, being beaten over our heads. When we made Welcome to Respite, the story is, it's so heart-centered, and our work is very heart-centered. And it has an aspect of dissociative identity disorder. And we really wanted to make sure that when we highlighted this disorder, that we didn't exploit it, that it came from a place of heart, that it gave people a sort of a feeling of what it might be like should they have had it, or should it have manifested in them when they were young. and putting people into like the 7-year-old avatar, giving them the experience of being a child again, seeing their parents, from the point of view that they did once when they were a child and, haven't done for many, many years, really affects the body. It allows these chemicals to sort of like pop up again that you haven't had for years, looking over the table the way you used to when you're a kid. We remember these things, and then your body just reacts, and it just, it makes the experience more full. This is something that couldn't be done in real life. It can only be done in something like VR, which makes it pretty special.
I think you just mentioned this, but one thing that when I experienced severance theory, welcome to respite, I was in the body of a child. So, yes. and my parents, the performers, you were my parents. And so you are immediately like thrown into this other, like you said, your memory, and you haven't been in the space where you have to interact with other people in this way. But the truth is that when you're new to immersive, you are feeling this kind of vulnerability that is very childlike. So I feel like you're more, in some ways, you're like very receptive to this kind of state of learning.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's an observation.
It's a very strange feeling of being seen in VR too. Maybe it's because you're behind this sort of literal mask, because you have a headset on, but just seeing another avatar, knowing there's a spirit behind them, and then just looking up at them, just there's this immediate feeling of being seen as a person. It's really quite profound. And I feel like we certainly we don't work in the mental health space. Like we aren't, that our goal is to tell stories, but when we tell stories, we want them to be heart-centered and to be uplifting, and to give audiences a connection and a feeling. And this particular show just happened to provide all of those things. And it's been a grand journey. And I think the audiences have responded quite strongly to the show, and profoundly the feeling of connection.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Dr. Gabe, could you tell us a little bit about your work with mindfulness, and then just tie that into how you decided to create a virtual self-care app? And maybe like if you can touch on a little bit about how it brings in this idea of playful resilience.
Sure. So I guess starting with sort of my take, on playful resilience. Resilience to me is really about how we respond to challenge and setbacks. And I think if the opposite of resilience would be to sort of internalize failure as a personality quality and stay down, resilience would be, how can I reframe these challenges as learning opportunities? How can I find them as sources of growth? There's been a lot of research on post-traumatic stress. There's emerging research on post-traumatic growth. And so I think resilience is really, how do we go about reframing these challenges as growth opportunities? And I got into this personally through having a lot of mental illness in my own family and in my own life. And in my struggle to kind of find how I could get out of a depressive mindset and things like that, mindfulness meditation was what found me. And you mentioned that I was a skeptic, and that's true. So I was getting my PhD in psychology at the time. I was very much a hard-brained scientist, and this comes out of Eastern spiritual traditions for the most part, so I was pretty skeptical. But when I saw the neuroscience of it, like literally, putting people, having them engage in mindfulness activities, and seeing the physical structures of how the brain changes, activity moving to the prefrontal cortex, deactivating somewhat a hyperactive amygdala, allowing us to observe this golden pause between a stressful event and how we respond to it. It's not about not feeling the feelings. It's not about not acknowledging the stresses, but instead of reacting through what our triggered body state makes us do, having the moment to pause and choose how we want to show up and effectively navigate that experience. So I have found mindfulness personally to be a big source of resilience for me, is how I tackle this stuff. So I was also thinking about how I could make a unique contribution in the space, because the other piece that inspired me to get involved in this work is that we've just seen astronomical increases in depression, anxiety, focus disorders, especially in our youth, but honestly across the board. So we've seen, like, for instance, a statistic of a 63% increase in depression in 12 to 17-year-olds in 3 years. And that was a pre-COVID figure. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, you know, this is clearly a problem and we need to do something about this. And that's what inspired me to make this game. I didn't start with a virtual pet. This is becoming a long answer, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I was on the floor of a conference by the National Alliance for Mental Illness, just interviewing people. Why are you here? Tell me about your struggles. You know, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And what I heard over and over again was this motivation of, I want to get a better handle on my mental health so that I can help other people. I heard this over and over and over again. And so I kind of had this idea of this Avatar: The Last Airbender action adventure mindfulness game that used a neurofeedback controller. Okay, actually, this virtual pet paradigm really fits, you know, really well, and is a bit more of an elegant solution for this particular problem that I'm trying to solve. We also decided to kind of take a step back from it because I recognized that while mindfulness might have been the self-care thing that worked well for me, it might not be the path for everyone. So that's why we made it a self-care virtual pet. And we have recorded mindfulness instruction in the game, but you can choose to engage with it or not. So ultimately what Amaru became was a Tamagotchi meets Headspace, or Neopets meets Headspace. And the idea is you've got your little virtual pet, you set 3 self-care goals for yourself each day. When you check off that you've interacted with the content in the game that checks off that goal, it gives you a virtual currency that you can spend on your pet. And also you witness yourself bond with the pet. So it's sort of this How to Train Your Dragon moment where Hiccup meets Toothless. At first, the dragon's very skittish, but over time you build this bond. And so the reason we wanted to build the gamification into this is mindfulness, and self-care in general, while there can be the short-term pops of benefit, it's really the habit forming that creates the real change, the lasting change. And we know how hard it is to establish a habit, especially when you're feeling down. So what gamification allows us to do is scaffold with reinforcement along the way to prevent drop off on the way to getting to those larger benefits. So we designed Amaru around being a roughly 2-month experience between the time that you start with your pet to the time he's at his max level, because that's the amount of time that it takes for a new habit to form. So that's the long-winded answer of how we got around to doing Amaru. And so when it comes to the playful resilience piece of it, Amaru is a game, but it is also a self-care resource library, and are using the gamification component. We're adding fun, we're adding art, we're adding beauty, and we're adding community, and that brings everyone in and gets them to stick with their practice more. The last thing I'll mention is that while people are getting to interact with Amaru and color him and change his colors and kind of interactivity in that way, if you come to our Discord, you're seeing them doing fan art, they're writing fan fiction, they're connecting with other people around their relationships with it. And so there's a lot of creativity and play that's happening even outside of the experience. So it's been fun. It's been a ride.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to do a quick time check. Okay, we're good on time. So I've got lots more questions for all of you. So I really want to make sure that our audience is leaving today with some like solid some tools or inspiration or things to check out that they can put in their toolkit to further their own work in their space. So is there something that each of you would say to a future digital health and well-being creator when it comes to making stories or experiences that are driven by impact? What is a little piece of advice that you would give them? Ines, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing is to make something that you truly care about. Because if you care about what you're doing, then you're going to develop something really great. And if you're convinced by the goal you're going for, then you can also convince other people. And that's what we did with COVID Reflections. We had Florida was one of the states that probably had the lowest vaccination. So we were concerned about that, and we were able to make an application to convince people to get the vaccine. So I'd say the main thing is to really care about the project you're developing.
That's a great tip. I feel like passion is what really drives you to make this work, because we all know, all of us who've made this type of work before know how much time and energy and money it takes to do it. So passion is truly that thing that drives you forward. Austin, do you have another tip or piece of advice for creators?
Yes, of course I do, and I quite suspect that Ines knows what I'm going to say. So this was a piece of advice that was passed to me by Yuji Han. She's a researcher in Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I spoke to her once about just finding yourself in the XR industry, right? Like where's all this going? Why are we doing this? And what sort of things should we be thinking of? The advice that she gave me, it really struck me, actually. She told me actually to go watch science fiction movies or books or whatever, and just try to make the stuff out of those movies, no matter how ridiculous it is, right? Because XR is this sort of wildly incredible technology that lets us almost sort of do what feels like impossible things, right? So as ridiculous as it sounds sometimes, just to open up, a novel about 1,000 years in the future and think that you're going to create something out of that book, you probably actually can in a lot of cases, or something that functions like it, so that was one of my favorite pieces of advice, and I definitely have come back to that thought many times while designing applications or thinking about what sort of thing to make next.
I think that's great advice. Wow. The thing is that even if you don't end up making that idea or that creation that's represented in this book or novel or film, the thing is you'll fall somewhere close to that. You'll be inspired. You'll have gotten out of your critical mind and into a place where you're creative and allowing wild ideas to kind of come to life. And I think that is the sweet spot in this space, like optimism and inspiration and drive and the spirit of adventure that is represented in a lot of this work is the thing that will motivate us. So I think that's actually like really brilliant advice. Thank you.
Of course.
There's something else I'd like to add, if it's fine.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what Austin said is definitely what I think too. I didn't want to say it because I knew that's what I was going to say. But another thing is, I'd say you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you make a project. There's a lot of resources available for you to start already at a very late project. So you don't have to do body tracking all over again. You don't have to try to reinvent AI. Just use like tools that let you build whatever you want and get to your goal as fast as possible. You don't have to start everything from scratch.
That's also great. That is a great tip. I think personally, and like a lot of people that I know do like to reinvent the wheel. And I think that the reinventing the wheel component of it is what wipes you out before you even get started. And the truth is that the distribution and exhibition component of a lot of this work is really, it's half the battle. So you need to make it to that stage so people can actually see the work and start to make impact beyond the device or the experience, right? So great advice. Thank you, Ines. Deirdre, is there any advice that you would give to creators in this space?
Sure. I just also want to say, a lot of times, as you were saying, and as a lot of times, we make the perfect the enemy of the good, and perfection in this arena, probably any arena, is kind of a fear-based place to come from, a fear of judgment, and to make something just really good, like it makes you happy, make it really good, so that you're not trying to as you say, reinvent the wheel, because it's got to be something that blows your mind. Like that's, maybe you'll stumble on it along the way. But to make that your goal is a bit of a hill that's impossible to climb. I also, well, my impossible dream is in every production that we make it personal, right? Like that makes it very tough to scale. But if you can make something personal to the audience member, to the person that you're who is attending, that is really the grounds for beautiful seed planting and growth, where it touches somebody and then that stays with them and then it continues to grow. It's one of the reasons that in our show we keep it grounded in mundane things, you know, Alex coming home and playing with crayons and watching their mom cook and chit chat about going to the playground. These are all things that we may have had happen in our lives, therefore that it's easier to project themselves into Alex. And then couching it within a story, because we are all natural storytellers. It's how we give context to our life. It's what got us through COVID, as we all streamed Netflix and Prime or whatever show, or read books, right? You know, stories really help us make sense of the world. And that was what I would say. Thank you.
So true. Yeah. And I think also that a lot of what was, I mean, obviously COVID was so stressful, but at least personally, I found that I had more time than I had in many years to kind of sit with myself and let my mind wander a little bit. And in that space, which I would say is maybe mindfulness, or at least something like it, there was time to kind of dream and come up with new ideas for the future. So I hear you. Okay, Dr. Gabe.
Sure. And so I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? Advice on building playful resilience, or what advice on what exactly?
You know, one of the things that I find with a lot of conversations is that we don't get enough time to give like specific like advice for our audience. So if you could give something that you've learned along the way, or a suggestion for someone who's about to make this kind of work, like what is a piece of advice that will keep someone, or like not keep them, but like compel them to make work in this space?
Cool. Well, I think I'll briefly echo some of the other things I would say. Certainly don't reinvent the wheel, and definitely collaborate. Don't feel like you have to take everything on yourself, because this is such a space that's such an intersection of art, technology, distribution, et cetera, that like it really does take a village to kind of get this stuff off the ground. So, you know, get out there, network, prototype using existing tools. Yeah, don't feel like you need to reinvent, like you said, motion capture or AI or something like that.
Join the community.
Yeah, exactly. Join the Unity for Humanity community. That's actually my specific advice. Actually, just join that community. That's what you need to do. There you go. Now, okay, so a couple. So I'll say two things. Since I'm in a space where we have, you know, a game and a product that people have been interacting with, actually, someone shared the other day that they had a 415-day streak, which to me is literally insane. So people have been sticking with it for a while, and so a community starts to grow around it. So you need to think to yourself, well, if I'm creating a community specifically calling attention to things like depression and anxiety, understand that your community is going to be full of people struggling with that issue. And therefore, in the way that you moderate that community, if you are not mental health professionals, you need to at least have a good contact or a good reference or a good resource. Because, you know, if somebody starts having a mental health crisis in your chat room, it's your chat room. Like, you still have to do something about that. So one of the things that we did was I had our moderation team go through a mental health first aid course, you know, which is just something where you see someone in crisis, and it's not to say that you're a therapist and you can necessarily do something about it, but just like how a first aid responder can be with the person until the medical help arrives. It's the same deal, but kind of on the mental health side. So just know that if you're in a product that's going to have a sustained community, thinking about the needs of that community beyond your product is a big piece of it. But I would say probably the biggest piece of advice that I would give is think about sort of the thing. There are things that you're personally attached to, and it's important to keep as many of those in your project as possible so that you can still be fired up by those things. But also think about what is the ultimate impact that you're trying to have, and maybe sometimes how you being personally attached to that little thing might be holding back the broader impact of the project. So for instance, in Amaru, we decided to go with completely 2D hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation. And it's beautiful. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. But Disney doesn't even do that anymore. It takes so long. It takes so long to do that type of animation. So I think to myself sometimes, like, man, if we had decided to go a slightly different pipeline with our art, how much more could we have developed this part of the content or this type of the experience or this type? And it's not to say that we couldn't extend the project in a new way with a new art style, but it is to say it's like that was something that we picked from the beginning. And as much as I think it really does help to enchant people to see this old school, really beautiful 2D hand-drawn art, there's a diminishing return on the end of the day on how much that's really driving impact on what we're really trying to get people to do, which is develop those self-care habits, So think about kind of, where you got to keep enough of the stuff in the project that keeps you passionate. We were talking about passion earlier, how it's got to be something you believe in, because you got to still work on it every day. So you still got to have those things. But then also, what can you maybe let go when that little personal piece of it is kind of holding back the overall impact? So just something to reflect on.
Really good advice. Thank you so much. I also love what you said about like your community will grow and you may not even expect the things that develop out of your community. So having room for that kind of space is very interesting and important.
Yeah,
so,
let your community help. Let your community help drive your project, but also don't let them bully your project. They will try. Like, so you gotta do a little bit of both.
Yeah. I have experienced personally the idea of like letting go of certain like design or art style choices that just really aren't worth the struggle. I mean, there are so many things within production of this type of work that are hard. So I hear what you're saying, like you need to have steam for the whole experience to keep running. All right, well, we that was really, really wonderful. Thank you, each of you, for sharing your advice and a little bit about your work. We actually now have time for Q&A. So before we get into that space, I want to make sure that we recognize that each of us have shown up today with a spirit of playful resilience. And I so appreciate that from all of our panelists and also all of our audience who are here today. And I would love to offer up the opportunity for each of you here today to join our Unity for Humanity community. So I'll be putting that link in the chat. And so hopefully you've all been thinking about a question or two. We actually have the opportunity to highlight individuals who have questions on screen. So if you feel up to that, we can make that happen. If that makes people in the audience feel uncomfortable, you can also just type it. So maybe just let us know which you prefer when you write your question. And thank you so much to all our panelists. And now let's see what questions are brewing. So you can you can just write them in the chat, and if you have one in the Q&A tab, we can actually, I guess somehow stream your face. So I don't think I see any questions at this time, but I'll give you a minute to write them in the chat.
I was just thinking about how, the what you said, Gabriel, about the community kind of pushing back on your sort of, game, and you had to, steadfast around the underpresents and Tempest, which is where I met Paisley. There's a very strong and opinionated Discord community, and they were often, wanting and pushing for, different storylines within the underpresents, and and sometimes the actors would pursue the Discord and look through their sort of secret lane, go, ooh, okay, and pull some ideas from there and stuff. But yeah, it is a bit of a give and take.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I I think it's interesting for me too, because as I mentioned, when I started this project, I knew I wanted to gamify mindfulness, and then that became gamify self-care, and then we went a completely different direction with the game. And like originally I was thinking of creating this, like I said, like Avatar: The Last Airbender styled Metroidvania, which has a very specific sort of exploration and challenge based player motivation, which could be no more different than the type of hyper casual player motivation within one does like a virtual pet game. And so I was walking into it with that degree of ignorance. And so having our community who obviously is attracted to those types of games and plays those types of games will be like, wait, oh yeah, customizing the pet, that's really important. You need to be able to do that. And had enough brilliant developers, fortunately, that we did things like writing a custom shader that lets you recolor hand-drawn animated frames, which was insane. And now we can texture them too. But yeah, if we didn't have those types of suggestions from the community, that would be wonderful. But I think probably like one of the most controversial things in our community right now is that we have these, we did a crowdfund, we did a Kickstarter, and we allowed people in our crowdfund to submit affirmations so that when players are playing the game, they could see like a daily affirmation from another player. Well, you better believe that what some people find affirming, other people find triggering. And so we have people blowing us up saying, oh, you need to take down this affirmation or that affirmation. And I've actually stood my ground pretty strong on that one. And I'm like, you know what? This was offered in a generous spirit from another player. And I'm going to encourage you to practice some curiosity with how this might be affirming. And if it's not, you've learned something about yourself. But we've done that round and round with our community a few times now, where so and so doesn't like another person's form of affirmation. So yeah, it's a joyful wrestling match sometimes in your community.
So I guess we don't have any questions from the audience, which is totally fine. We can continue chatting for a couple of more minutes. Is there anything next on the horizon for each of you that you're interested in diving into, or are you continuing the work that you're currently engaged in? Ines and Austin?
Absolutely. Ines, did you want to take it or? Okay. Absolutely. No, we're definitely trying to apply a similar type of thinking, not really the same technology or the same platform, but we want to continue to move forward in addressing AR at use cases in public health, because we really did find that augmented reality, especially when combined with artificial intelligence implementations like this body tracking package that we used, really allows you to create adaptive experiences that you can kind of roll out anywhere, that can sort of actively, intelligently, I know that the word is sort of controversial sometimes, but intelligently, tailor the experience that you're trying to present to a variety of different audiences. I think there's a ton to do there, and a lot that would be of great benefit to the public. So that's sort of the direction that we're heading.
Nice. Ines, do you have anything you want to add to that about like what's next?
Yeah, same as what Austin said. We hope to continue using specifically AR to encourage to engage people in experiences and encourage them to do more things with the intention of public good. Yeah.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a question in the chat there.
Amazing. Okay, we have a question. Whew. How do you make the transition from inspiration to reality, especially since it's difficult to bounce back from discouragement, like thinking about climate change? So I feel like the question is really about, we are facing real concerns in our world, like climate change. So how do you make work that's both inspiring and makes real impact? Gabe, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, sure. So Yeah, I mean, I think that probably one of the things that our generation is struggling with as much as we are is that we've got, uninterrupted 24/7 access to global level catastrophe that we often don't feel like we can make an individual, impact on. And feeling disempowered is oftentimes like a big source of distress. So, the reason why Amaru has the skills that it does have is like sometimes what being mindful is about is like recognizing that feeling of helplessness and but also recognizing where one doesn't have control. So I think, we are facing some pretty extraordinary times, extraordinary circumstances. We could get bogged down with despair, but I think if we have the ability to take a step back, recognize that that is the situation that we're in, but then think about, well, where are places that we can have an impact? And so the advice that I give to people in this area is really just to find one, because one individual probably can't solve climate change, and one individual can't solve, some of these like larger issues. But is there one local issue that you can take on and really go after that you have control over? It's like everyone has to do their part. Don't take on the weight of the world and think that that's going to help. Just see if you can find one local thing that you can actually have impact on and do that.
And Gabe, don't you feel like mindfulness is exactly a tool for that? Like personally, I find that if I can use mindfulness or meditation to basically lower my anxiety about those things, I can stay on track with my personal work, which I hope will make an impact. And it's a way, like, knowing that you're making positive social impact work is another way of staying engaged and not getting for me at least, it's a way of not getting overwhelmed by the challenges of the world that we live in.
Yeah, and again, one of the principal bits of mindfulness is meeting the world where it is. So it's not saying that this stuff isn't happening. It's not saying that this stuff can't feel overwhelming or can't feel anxiety producing, but it is saying I can take a step back from those emotions, and I can absolutely allow myself to fall into a negative spiral downward, but that's not going to serve me and it's not going to serve the cause, right? So having the ability to recognize that, yep, climate change is real and it's scary and it's disempowering and that sucks and it makes me feel all of these ways and I own all of that, but I'm also just going to actively choose, like, I'm not going to allow that to just push me down. I'm going to take a step out of that storm, look at it from a distance, and then think, what do I have control over and how can I make a positive impact and direction? So that's pretty much the heart of it, really. Anyone else have a thought on that one?
I often say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So you can't, as you said, take on the whole thing all by yourself and expect to be able to do everything. It's too much. And so first of all, passion for something is going to carry you through the very trying times when, persistence is what's called for. If you look at somebody like Greta Thunberg's work, she started off with something very simple that she could do every Friday. She went and protested outside of Parliament, and she did that every day, every Friday, and every Friday, and every Friday until it started to grow. So it was one thing. So I would say, make it one thing and make it personable and make it something that you can tackle by yourself. Or, well, one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind, Deirdre, when you're talking about this passion takes you so far. And I think that we have a powerful community of creators and passionate folks who can help us and share our work. And it might be optimistic and hopeful, but I really believe that together with our communities, whether it's partnering with other organizations or sharing our work, that there are people who can help us with these things to carry it from the passion to the next step. And so that's where community enters the scene. So hopefully that also helps us eat the elephant. Okay, we have another.
How do you eat an elephant? With a team.
With a team. Yes.
There you go.
Okay, so the question is, how have you reconciled outcomes from playtesting during development with assumptions made during the creative design process? For example, research versus practice, maybe another way to consider this.
Briefly, I recommend if you're going to work on a project like this, using some sort of agile software development type framework can be helpful, because it's about kind of, as I believe as Deirdre was saying earlier, about not letting perfect be the enemy of good, and holding back your work and being very shy to share it and get feedback. Instead, getting that prototype out in front of people as fast as possible, getting feedback and iterating, and doing that as often as you can. That can help you from not doubling down on a bad design decision for a year. Instead, you can discover that within a few weeks. And I think let's see, reconcile outcomes of playtesting. Yeah, I would say agile, get feedback often, play test your stuff. Like, I know it's scary. I know it's like, you don't want to share it because it's not done, and we're all artists and we want it to be perfect. But no, share it early and often.
I mean, honestly, it can be a hard thing to reckon with, right? Like, sometimes you have these huge expectations of the kind of change you're going to make and how it's going to come to fruition. One thing that I've realized through my own work is that sometimes it just takes a long time. Like, it's a ripple effect. Sometimes you think it's just like, as soon as your project is released, you're going to have this huge momentum and you're going to change the world. But actually, it's a much quieter, slower person to person sharing of knowledge that happens. So that's my experience. Ines, do you have something? Austin, I see that you've unmuted. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think one important thing to realize, that, and one thing that we really experienced while developing COVID Reflections, is to understand that what your project means to you is not necessarily what it means to other people, right? So you, of course, approach every project with assumptions about how it's going to work, what you think it will be. But when you put it into the wild, right, it sometimes becomes something that it was never intended to be. And I think, there is something to say, and I know we've heard about the importance of staying firm on some of your core design decisions. That's definitely true. I would also say there's also merit in not being afraid to let the project develop organically in the context of the community or the context in which it's operating, right? Mm-hmm. With COVID Reflections, where it started off with, hey, we want to give information. When we realized how people were actually interacting with this technology, it totally changed how we viewed the entire project, how we talked about it, how we contextualized it in the context of our research, or whatever, right? I mean, you can't be afraid to let it become what it becomes. And you can't always direct that process. You don't even really approach it intentionally. Sometimes it just happens,
I'm from immersive theater, and I come from a bit of a different perspective on this. But for us, there's the show you write and rehearse, and then you get the test audiences and everything's out the window. Then you know what your show's going to be, right? So I think there's a little bit, for us, there's a little bit of a less expectation, as far as we just assume that there's going to be changes once we get the test audiences, and then it's no big deal. We're just like, oh, this is where it's going now, and this is what we need to do. So allowing yourself the freedom to not, weight it in such a way that you don't allow it to breathe and take on its own life.
And there's no shortage of examples of this happening in the game space. Halo did not start as a first-person shooter. The Sims did not start as what it started. It was more of like a building construction game. And what they found during playtesting with Halo, for instance, was the closer they brought in the camera, the more fun it became, to the point where they made it a first-person game. And that there's no shortage of brilliant stories like that. Amaru started as an Avatar: The Last Airbender side-scrolling Metroidvania and ended up as a virtual pet. This does happen. So absolutely, think about what is the overall value that you're trying to achieve, and lean into that.
With that, sorry, Ines, go ahead.
Also, I think it's important to be ready to restart the project, because sometimes it's harder to try to fix a project than restarting it from scratch based on the feedback that you got. So in our case, especially from the developer standpoint, sometimes you have a big idea of how amazing the project would look, and then you look at your hardware and it's just not possible. Like, you build something that looks amazing, and then you build it, push it to the device, and it doesn't work. So you just have to restart, maybe make it look a little bit different, a little bit less sound effects and like VFX and everything, and then and yeah, that. So it's important to be ready to restart if you need to.
It
Yeah,
sounds
and
like this might be me assuming things here, but it sounds like each of you have a spirit of playful resilience in the creation of your work. It's not just playful resilience for the audience, but it's also how you each approach the production and creation process. And with that playful resilience, when there is a problem or an issue that comes up, you are curious and you're able to kind of keep going and ride I like to think about it like surfing the waves of change. And I just want to let you know we're actually past our time here today. So I wanted to thank each of you for being here, and all of our audience members. There are many of you here, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to hear our fabulous creators' stories. And I welcome you all to join our Unity for Humanity Discord community. And the idea there is that we can each bring our expertise and our curiosities to a shared space and hopefully make an impact in the physical and beyond the screen world. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave this up for just a couple of minutes so that each of our creators can share their links in the chat.
Sure. Paisley, thank you so much for moderating this discussion today. It was really a lot of fun.
Of course. It was a blast. Yeah, I'm putting I think I put it in the chat here, but if anyone's interested in the Discord, it's here. And thank you to our audience members who asked questions. They were really, really great.
Truly.
And the Discord is we have channels for digital health and well-being. We have a channel for inclusive economic opportunity, education, sustainability, and environment. So if there's anything that's calling to you within the impact space, there hopefully will be a community for you there. So with that, thank you to Games for Change for having us, and I hope you all have a spirit of playful resilience through the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.